مشاهدينا أهلا وسهلا بكم في هذا اللقاء الخاص. تنضم معنا معالي رئيسة اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر السيدة ميريانا سبولياريتش في هذا اللقاء الخاص على قناة الأخبار للوقوف على أهمية الزيارة لدولة الكويت وأبعاد هذه الزيارة والشراكات القائمة تجاهها. أهلا بك سعادة الرئيسة. أولا، ما هي أهمية زيارتكم لدولة الكويت في هذا التوقيت تحديدا، وما الذي يميز شراكة الصليب الأحمر مع وزارة الخارجية، الهلال الأحمر الكويتي والصندوق الكويتي للتنمية؟
The International Committee of the Red Cross has been present in the country for decades, since the early 90s. During that time, we worked very closely with the authorities, especially focusing on bringing back missing people to Kuwait. In the meantime, we have expanded this cooperation, and Kuwait has become a very valuable and steadfast partner of the work and supporter of the work of the International Committee of the Red Cross. So I'm very pleased to be here today for the fourth institutional dialogue that we have established between our organization and the government, the Foreign Ministry in particular, to discuss how we will further strengthen our cooperation, but also bring it to a much more strategic level in the future. And of course, the different institutions which you have mentioned, and especially the Kuwait Development Fund, but also the National Red Crescent Society, are important partners as well, but also funders of our work, so they provide financial support.
ما أبرز النتائج أو المشاريع التي تتوقعين أن تنبثق من خلال هذه الزيارة في المستقبل القريب؟
They're twofold. They focus on specific situations of armed violence. We focus on Syria, we focus on Yemen, we focus on Somalia, but also, and especially today, on the situation in Gaza. So the support that we receive from Kuwait allows us to conduct operations not only in the field of humanitarian assistance, but also in the field of protection. So we work on the missing in Syria, we work on the missing in other situations of conflict, but we also visit detention center. We provide in particular what we call sustainable humanitarian assistance by not bringing it, if we don't have to, water tanks, but by working on local infrastructure that will repair water systems, notably now in Gaza, to allow people to have better access to clean water or drinkable water in the future.
من خلال زيارتك لدولة الكويت، كيف ترين دور الكويت في دعم الجهود سواء على الصعيد الإقليمي والدولي؟ أتحدث هنا عن الدور الإنساني لدولة الكويت.
There's no light between us and Kuwait when it comes to prioritizing international humanitarian law. The Kuwaiti policy and strategy is very aligned with what we ask from states. We ask them to put more priority into the implementation of the Geneva Conventions, for example, that define the rules of war and how civilians in conflicts have to be protected. Now, Kuwait is very advanced in the implementation of international humanitarian law into national legislation and national institutions, and this can help as a model for other states to follow, because the law will only be as strong as the state's commitment to actually implement it.
كيف تصفين الوضع الإنساني الحالي، خاصة أن العالم يمر بأحداث كثيرة وأزمات كثيرة أيضا، خاصة في مناطق الأزمات؟ كيف تصفين الوضع في السودان وغزة تحديدا؟
We are currently focused on the situation in Sudan, and in particular on Al-Fashir, where we still don't have access to the civilian population that we need to reach. But what we hear from those that we are meeting and that we are trying to help that have fled Al-Fashir is extremely horrific, in the sense that there are massive attacks against civilians, whether they stay or they flee. There's systematic deprivation of food and everything they need for survival, and this situation has to be reversed. We are calling on the parties to allow us to access the civilian population and to spare the civilian population from further harm. It is unacceptable. It is beyond any moral and legal standards to continue watching that situation unfold. But I have said similar things on the situation in Gaza. You see how the entire territory has been turned into rubble. You see how an entire people has been deprived of their human dignity, how they still don't find enough food and shelter for upcoming winter to protect themselves. Gaza is still an unsafe territory, and we need to massively scale humanitarian assistance there as well. We continue at the same time to work on the operations that are necessary to fulfill the agreement. But no matter how things evolve, the ceasefire has to hold, because there's no resilience left in the civilian population to withstand further massive military operations as we have seen in the past.
هناك العديد من التحديات التي تفضلت فيها في المناطق التي تشهد العديد من الأزمات، سواء الحروب وما يترتب عليها من تعقيدات تجاه هذا الأمر. ما هي أبرز التحديات التي تواجه عمل اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر في هذه المناطق؟
Now, the single main challenge, if I had to put it on a scale, is the ceasefire in Gaza. And the single main challenge in the same logic is the absence of a ceasefire in Sudan. It has to hold in Gaza, and we have to establish it in Sudan. We have to have access to the people that we need to help, and the people have to be spared from hostilities. And the parties to the conflict in either side have a clear obligation to protect civilians from further harm. And what we have seen needs to be reversed.
برأيك كيف تقيسين أثر عمل اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر على المجتمعات المتضررة؟
I mean, we can save lives when we have access to the people. We can bring medical assistance, we can bring food, we can bring, the tools that they need for survival. But if we don't have access, then we cannot spare them from further harm. At the center are the rules of war that need to be better respected by all parties, but all states have an obligation to ensure that the parties respect these rules of war so that the civilians are spared from unnecessary harm. And it is senseless suffering that we see, that we continue watching, and states have a responsibility to exercise the necessary pressure for this to end.
سؤالي الأخير لك السيدة ميريانا، في ظل الأزمات المتزايدة حول العالم، ما رؤيتكم لمستقبل العمل الإنساني الدولي؟
Humanitarian action is intrinsically linked to the respect that warring parties show for international humanitarian law. Only then can we operate, and only then can we be effective. Now, the law is respected across the globe in different situations, otherwise we would never be able to bring assistance. But we want a more systematic respect for international humanitarian law, and for this we need political leadership, political commitment, political courage to work with us on how these laws can be better respected in the future. And again, it's the primary responsibility of states, but it's a key responsibility of all parties, state or non-state, to an armed conflict. And states, most of all, have a responsibility not only to respect these rules, but also to ensure that these rules are better respected by others, and especially those they have an influence on.
معالي رئيسة اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر السيدة ميريانا سبولياريتش، شكرا جزيلا لك لوجودك معنا في هذا اللقاء الخاص.
شكرا.
إذا مشاهدينا، كنا معكم في هذا اللقاء الخاص مع رئيسة اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر السيدة ميريانا سبولياريتش في هذا اللقاء. شكرا للمتابعة، إلى اللقاء.